Last year, I went on a long road trip for work as I travel a lot for my job. But let's skip the work stuff and get to my story. I started my journey at around 4 p.m. from the city I was staying in. I knew it would be a late night of driving, and I wouldn't reach my hotel until about 2 in the morning. I drove for many hours. The roads were quite busy when I began, but as I kept going, they became less crowded. It was around 1 in the morning, and I still had about an hour and a half left to reach my destination. The roads were empty, which was nice, and I was feeling pretty good. I was in a remote area, and while driving, I saw a car approaching in my rearview mirror. The other cars seemed to be going pretty fast. Since I was already in the right lane, I expected it to quickly pass me. However, it reached my car and then slowed down, matching my speed. I glanced over to see who was driving. It turned out to be an old, worn-out car that looked about 20 years old. One of its windows had duct tape on it. What caught my attention was the driver wearing a skeleton mask. He stared at me for a moment and then turned his gaze forward, speeding ahead. I was a bit startled but kept driving. The car overtook me and then merged into my lane in front of me, maintaining a distance of about 5 car lengths while driving at the same speed. When I looked in my mirror again, saw more cars approaching. They too were going pretty fast as they reached my car and the first one began to pass me. I glanced over to see that this man was also wearing a skeleton mask. He passed me and drove side by side with the car ahead of me. The next car pulled forward and then another. Every driver of these cars were wearing skeleton masks. I looked behind me and saw even more cars by now. I was completely surrounded by these skeleton mask drivers. I started to get really creeped out and wasn't sure what to do. I didn't know what was going on, as if these people were trying to run me off the road or something. I kept driving and before long the cars seemed to get closer to me. I knew I would have to do something, and was hoping that an exit would come up. About a mile later, I was happy to see an exit finally come. So I maintained my speed with the cars closing in on me and at the last second, swerved onto the exit ramp from the freeway. The 2 cars in front of me and the one next to me were unable to make the exit, so it was just me and a bunch of cars following me now. I turned right and anxiously searched for a safe place to go. There were about 5 cars following me. I continued driving and one of the cars behind me started to speed up in an attempt to pass. We passed by a restaurant and another store, but then I spotted a gas station, and to my surprise there was a police car parked there. I quickly maneuvered my car and entered the gas station. I parked right next to the police car. Some of the cars following me pulled into the gas station but drove through and left. I waited for the officer to return to his car after going inside the convenience store. When he came back, I explained my situation to him. He assured me that he would inform the other police officers in the area. He even offered to drive a few miles behind me on the freeway to make sure I wouldn't be followed again. That's exactly what we did, and about an hour later, I safely reached my hotel thanks to the police officer's help. Two summers ago, my wife and I went on a long road trip across the country. We were going to visit our relatives and join a big family gathering. Instead of flying, we decided to drive because we had enough time and wanted to explore some cities along the way that we really liked. On the first day, we drove for about 8 or 9 hours and then stopped to spend the evening somewhere. The next day, we wanted to go a little further, so we drove until late at night. It was around 11 p.m. when we left the main freeway and took a smaller highway. This highway was surrounded by woods on both sides and was quite peaceful at that time. We only saw a couple of other cars on the road. After about 10 minutes of driving on that road, we noticed a man standing in the middle of the road. He was waving his arms to get our attention. So I quickly pressed my foot on the brakes to slow down. As we got closer, we saw that there was an older man, probably in his 70s, standing there. It seemed like he was in some kind of trouble, so we decided to stop the car and help him. The old man walked up to my window, and I rolled it down just a little bit. He seemed genuinely worried. He explained that his car had run out of gas a while back on a side road, and he was trying to walk back to his house. He asked if we could give him a ride home, saying it was only a couple of miles away. My initial reaction was to say no, but the old man seemed harmless, so I thought, why not lend a hand? I told him to sit in the back seat, and I would give him a ride. He got into the back of my car and thanked us multiple times. Then he informed us that his house was just up the road, and he had some gas there that he could take to his car and truck. He gave us directions to his house. We drove for about a mile up the road, and then turned onto a quiet road surrounded by thick woods on both sides. We continued driving on this road for a minute or so, when the man asked us to turn at what seemed like a driveway. I pulled into it and asked the man if this was his driveway. He said yes, but then requested if we could go a bit further up. The driveway was narrow and twisted around, making it hard to see far ahead due to all the trees. I kept driving along the narrow driveway, but I started feeling uneasy. Suddenly, the skinny road opened up into a clear space. The man said it was okay to stop here and that we could drop him off. He got out of the car, but as soon as he did, I noticed some movement coming from the woods behind us. Then I turned and saw more movement in front of us. Without thinking twice, I pressed hard on the gas pedal and put my car in reverse, not even knowing what was happening. My wife began to scream. I glanced and saw several men running towards my car from different directions. I quickly backed out of the narrow driveway as fast as I could. One of the men hit the side of my car with something, but I didn't even know what it was. Once we were out of the driveway and back on the road, I drove away as fast as possible towards the highway. Both my wife and I were shaking, and I have to admit, I was scared too. I don't know what kind of dangerous situation that old man was trying to trick us into. A few years ago, I went on a long road trip across the country because I was moving from one side to the other. I was alone and I enjoyed living in my car for a while. However, I had a problem because my car was very old and not in good condition. I planned to buy a new car and get rid of the old one. But I decided to wait until after I finished moving because it would be too much trouble to deal with at that time. Sometimes the old car would stop working, but it managed to perform well in the beginning of the trip. On the third day, it was really hot, and after driving almost continuously for about 10 hours. But then suddenly, I felt my car starting to stop working. It was around 9 p.m., and the road I was driving on was very quiet. It wasn't a big highway because I was taking a shortcut according to the map. Instead, it was a small road surrounded mostly by trees. I didn't want to be stuck here, but unfortunately, my car started slowing down until it eventually stopped on the side of the road. I turned off the engine and waited a few minutes before trying to start it again. But still, nothing happened when I tried to start it. I realized I needed help, so I took out my phone to make a call. But to my disappointment, I saw that I had no signal or service. I didn't know what to do next. I decided to step out of my car and walked a short distance up the road, hoping to get better signal there. I walked about 20 feet while keeping an eye on my phone to see if I could get any signal bars. Just then, I heard a sound coming from the woods. At first, I thought it might be a deer, but when I looked, I didn't see any deer. Instead, I saw the legs of a man, but the rest of his body was hidden by the trees. I didn't understand why there would be a man in the woods at that time. It made me feel uneasy, so I decided to go back to my car. I got inside, closed the door, and locked it. I glanced out of the car window towards the woods, but I didn't see anything. I went back to my phone and decided to restart it, hoping it might help me get some signal. I knew it was unlikely, but I wanted to try everything I could. While my phone was restarting, I heard a noise coming from the right side of my car. I looked and my heart stopped when I saw a man, standing at my passenger's window looking in. He looked dirty and was not wearing a shirt. He started trying to open the door. When it didn't open, he started banging on the window. I sat there for a few seconds, frozen with fear. Finally, I began to yell at him to go away, but it didn't seem to work. I tried my phone to call the police, but it still didn't have any service. Then the man suddenly stopped banging and ran back towards the woods. I saw him grab a large stick and then start to walk back to my car. I was about to get out and run away. I didn't have a plan after that, but I didn't feel safe in my car with that guy banging on it. As soon as I started to open my door, I saw bright headlights of a truck pulling behind me. The truck came to a stop behind my car, so I got out quickly and walked to it. It was a large-looking man who was wearing a camel jacket and started to ask if I needed a tow, but in the middle of his sentence, he saw the man with the stick arrive at my car. I explained to the man in the truck that the other guy seemed to be crazy and was trying to get inside my car. In response, the man in the truck reached under his seat, took out a gun, and got out of his truck. He shouted at the shirtless guy, who saw the gun and quickly dropped his stick, raising his hands in surrender. The man from the truck gave me his phone and told me to call the police. Thankfully, he had a working phone signal, and we waited until the police arrived. It was a very intense and unforgettable night. The old man was taken away by the police, and my car was towed. I stayed at a hotel in a nearby town that night. After my car was repaired, I sold it as soon as I reached my new home.
It was a cold and raining night, and I was huddled up in my jacket at the bus stop, waiting for the bus to come and pick me up, so I could finally go back home. I'm not sure how long he was standing there because I wasn't paying much attention. But when I looked up from staring at the ground, I quickly noticed there was a man staring at me from across the street. He was standing there on the sidewalk across from me in the pouring down rain. That gave me a really uneasy feeling. But I had no other choice but to wait for the bus. And unfortunately for me, the bus took another 10 minutes to get there, and the wait was excruciating. This man was making me very uncomfortable. Shortly after, he crossed the street and he started walking over to me. And when he got over to me, he sat down right next to me and he didn't say a thing. It made me even more uncomfortable that he sat directly next to me because the entire bench was open for a spot to sit, and he chose to sit right by me, only giving me like 2 inches of breathing room. A few minutes of that quiet awkwardness took place until the bus finally arrived. As soon as I saw the bus, I was relieved a little bit. I got on the bus and I walked towards the back, and I sat down in one of the seats closest to the back. I should have sat in the very last seat, but for some reason I didn't. The man followed me all the way to the back, and he sat one seat across from me and one seat behind me. I could literally feel him staring at the back of my head the entire 10 minutes I sat there, and every time I looked behind me, he was looking back at me. I already had a really bad vibe about him in this situation. However, that feeling tripled when I moved to the front of the bus at the next stop, and he followed behind sitting much closer to me. This time I knew I had to do something soon, and I was thinking on my feet. So the only thing I thought to do was text my mom and let her know the situation, and that I was going to be getting off at a different location rather than going home, because I didn't want the man knowing where we lived. I got off the bus at the next stop, which thankfully for me was in town in a more populated area, so I felt like I would be much safer. When I got off the bus, though, he got off with me. Now, at this point, my anxiety was through the roof, and I sort of panicked. So I walked back up to the bus and I got on the bus, thinking that he wouldn't follow me, but he did. As soon as I sat down, I saw him walking up the steps with the bus. I got back up immediately when he sat down across from me, and I stormed up to the bus driver and I told him that I was sorry and that I needed to get off here. I ran down the steps and I looked behind me and I saw that the man was still on the bus. It looked like he tried to get off at the stop with me again, but the bus driver closed the door before he could get out. I'm not sure if the bus driver started to realize what was going on and that I was being followed, or if he was just simply getting annoyed and was sick of us walking on and off the bus every 2 seconds and just happened to close the door before he could get off. Anyways, that gesture might have saved my life. As the bus drove off, I saw the man standing in the back of the bus, looking out the very back window, emergency exit, staring at me with a knife in his hand. I don't know what he had planned, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out.